Okay, Dion, so I got a couple of readings to do, so I'm just going to get right to them. And this is called Rights, What Rights? Doctrines of Colonialism by Chelsea Vowel. From Indigenous Rights, a guide to First Nation, Metis, and Inuit issues in Canada. So it's an article that starts out in this sort of like a sarcastic tone that is like kind of like highlighting or like highlighting the absurdity of the denial of Indigenous rights in a sort of like, I guess, handbook for deniers. So it sort of like flips the narrative into this like colonial viewpoint. So yeah, it takes this position of denial in this sarcastic way through the article, and I think it's an interesting strategy because although it's very short, it actually really makes you slow down and kind of think about the points that are being made here. And it also uses the past, or like a version of the past, to illustrate this. So it kind of like refers to these doctrines in a way to justify not only the actions of those that are vigorously denying Indigenous rights, as it says, but also to sort of minimize it for others. And I think that's kind of an important thing to point out, because this process of denial is passed through these binary mindsets in groups that are often seen in like now realistically in these like conservative communities that, and I've experienced this firsthand. So with my ex-family. So I guess the thesis of this could be something like the denial of Indigenous rights creates a system of carelessness towards Indigenous people that extends throughout Western societies, or maybe something that's more confrontational, like an Indigenous writer explains the ridiculousness of the denial of Indigenous sovereignty through the lens of a common colonial groupthink. Yeah. So it goes about proving its point by placing Indigenous reality in like this flipped position, like I was saying, of the right wing, or like the non-Indigenous, maybe uneducated, colonial, settler, conservative, Christian, maybe, possibly. Yeah, so mostly I've come across this attitude actually in the Christian community, and specifically in the family of my ex. So in this article, the tone and the language that's used even has, although it sounds ridiculous to read it, it's actually been used throughout like that family, those just specific phrases and things like oh, I'm pretty sure, or like it's like this, almost like this way of speaking that insults the individual, like almost puts them into this like it's condescending, I guess, you know. So yeah. So it takes very serious issues like the ownership of land or traditional rights, and it presents them in that perspective, which not only minimizes them, but it's like completely outrageous. So it's completely realistic of how this kind of logic is like can be formed in the space of a right-wing settler, for instance. And I guess to add to that way of writing and like kind of flipped again, I would say it's very authentic of European right-wing settler thought. So yeah, and so something that I found interesting was the way that the sarcasm was formed in language, like I was saying earlier. It was very direct. For instance, when she's talking about the supposed legitimacy of the doctrine of discovery, the ambivalence in the face of its hypocrisy, when she says, we're talking about a very old tradition, more than 500 years, using almost like a group or like a galvanized type of language that minimizes the individual's thought to be almost absurd in itself. And over time, I'll tell you something that actually works, and you start to question yourself and the way that you think, and it's actually very harmful. So yeah. So yeah, and yeah, so I found this whole thing very, very familiar to me. This animated way of using phrases and words in this passive aggressive type of manner. So it's not necessarily like political either, but oftentimes it is also considered like a political perspective as well. And I think like considering like the control of the church at that time, it would likely see any form of dissent as against Christianity and therefore against the nation at that time. So I think that these sort of ways of communication are they're forms of they're ways that are passed on from generation to generation, because it doesn't actually require you to do any sort of education or like think. You can just sort of say whatever's been said all this time and come in with that group think that sort of beats the person down to the point that they're, not really sure of themselves anymore. So yeah, so it was interesting. But yeah, so I'll get another one here in a sec.